She was abandoned by her pack, left in the snow like she had never mattered. Like the 3 years she'd given them, the hunts, the healing, the long winter nights she'd stayed awake so others could sleep, had added up to nothing. To less than nothing, because when she needed them most, they left anyway. And now, alone in the worst blizzard in a decade, with her cub burning with fever in her arms and her own body shaking past the point of endurance, she did the only thing she had left. She sang one last song, her mother's song, the one she'd been saving for a moment that deserved it. The moment when you've done everything right, and the world has done everything wrong, and all you have left is your voice, and the child in your arms, and the hope that somewhere, somehow, something is listening. She sang into the storm, and the storm answered, because through the dark and the ice and the howling wind, something moved. Something enormous, something deliberate, something that should not have been out in this weather, but was, and it was walking straight toward her. She looked up, and Alpha King Kadrin Ashvale, ruler of 7 pack territories, commander of 30,000 wolves, the most powerful alpha in the known pack lands, stepped out of the blizzard, snow in his dark hair, pack mark glowing amber through his cloak, eyes that found her immediately, eyes that did not look away. Everything changed that night. Act 1, the woman they never saw. Her name was Wren, and I need you to understand something about her before the storm, before the cub, before any of what comes next. She was not what her pack said she was. She was never what they said she was. The Grey Hollow pack had decided Wren was soft in her first year among them, and they had never once revisited that verdict. In Grey Hollow, soft was the worst thing you could be, worse than slow, worse than wrong, worse than almost anything. Soft meant feeling too much, noticing too much, caring about things that didn't produce immediate, measurable results. Wren felt things deeply. That was the truth of it. She was 23 years old, the daughter of a wandering healer who had died when she was 16, leaving her to raise herself on the northern edge of Grey Hollow territory with nothing but knowledge of medicinal plants, a talent for reading weather, and a voice that carried music the way some people carry grief as something fundamental, something they were made of. She was not soft. She was strong in every way that didn't fit their definitions. She hunted alone and brought in as much as the senior pack hunters, sometimes more. She built better snow shelters than anyone in the pack had ever bothered to teach her. She'd learned by failing and correcting and failing again, which is the way you learn things no one helps you with. She had tracked a wounded elk through a whiteout once, alone, for 7 hours, and come home with enough meat to feed 12 people for a week. She had done this and received a nod, the acknowledgement of something that was useful without being remarkable, because they had already decided she was the second kind of thing and nothing she did was going to change the category. She also brought food to the elderly female in the eastern den without being asked. She sat with the young ones during storms when they were frightened. She sang at the fire sometimes old songs, her mother's songs, and the pack sat quieter on those nights, though none of them would have admitted why. These things didn't count. The alpha of Grey Hollow was Durg, a broad, certain man who had never once updated an opinion and was proud of it. He had decided Wren was a liability the year she arrived, and had spent the following 3 years finding ways to prove himself right. When she suggested a different hunting route that would have yielded better results, he overruled her publicly and then used her route privately. When she identified a pack member's illness 2 weeks before the pack physician did, she was told she was catastrophizing. When the illness spread, and she was right, no one remembered she'd said anything. She learned to stop saying things. She learned the particular art of existing in a space where you are present and invisible simultaneously, of giving what was needed without expecting anything back, of building a life inside the gaps of someone else's structure, of finding small dignities in private moments because the public ones had stopped being offered. She survived this way for 3 years. And then came Oren. Oren was not hers by birth. He was 6 months old when she found him left at the edge of the territory in a cold that would have killed him within an hour, from a litter that the pack had deemed too large to support. This was Grey Hollow law. Surplus young were left at the boundary in winter. The pack was not cruel about it. In their own accounting, they were practical. Wren was not practical about it. She brought him home. Durg told her she was being sentimental, that she was taking resources the pack needed for viable young, that she was demonstrating, once again, the essential problem with her, the inability to separate emotion from function. She looked at the cub in her arms, 6 months old, dark-furred, gray-eyed, already studying her face with the focused attention of something that had decided she was his whole world. "Then I'll raise him without pack resources," she said. "He won't take anything that isn't mine." Durg let it go because it was easier than the alternative, and because he had not yet arrived at the version of his opinion that would require him to do something about Wren specifically. That version came 6 months later. It came with a hard winter, and a territory dispute with the neighboring Ironholt pack, and a council decision that required consolidating the pack's numbers and resources and removing anyone who wasn't. In the senior council's language, load-bearing. Wren was not load-bearing. In their accounting, they told her at dawn, 3 council members and 2 guards, official enough that there was no room for argument without escalation, and Wren had always understood that escalation in Grey Hollow cost more than it returned. "The pack releases your claim to territory and resource share," the council member said, reading the formula. "You are not expelled. You may remain at the boundary." The boundary in Grey Hollow's language meant outside the pack's protection. It meant alone, in winter, with a 13-month-old cub, and whatever she had already managed to accumulate for herself. She did not beg. She had known this was coming in the way that people who pay attention know things from 100 small signals, a gradual withdrawal of what little warmth had been extended, the way senior members had stopped meeting her eyes 3 weeks before. She had already moved her stores to the southern den she'd built alone last autumn. She took Orin and walked to the boundary, and did not look back, not because she wasn't breaking, because she had learned, a long time ago, that breaking in front of people who wanted you to break was the one thing you did not give them. Act 2, the winter, she survived. The first month alone was the hardest. Not because of the cold, she had always been good with cold. Not because of the food, she was a capable hunter, and a single adult and a small cub needed less than she could bring in on a good week. It was the silence. Not the external silence she had always preferred quiet to the noise of a pack that didn't want her. It was the internal silence, the one that had previously been filled by the simple animal reassurance of other bodies nearby, other heartbeats in the dark, the specific warmth of proximity, even unfriendly proximity. That was gone now. She had Orin, his heartbeat, his warmth pressed against her in the night, his habit of tucking his face under her chin when he slept, his absolute, uncomplicated conviction that she was safety itself. She built her world around that. She reinforced the southern den with additional insulation-packed earth, stacked timber, a series of wind baffles she designed after 3 iterations and 2 failures. She mapped the hunting grounds within a safe radius and established rotation patterns that would prevent overhunting. She found a freshwater source that didn't ice over until deep winter and established a path to it. She was, in the way of people who have always had to be their own infrastructure, extraordinarily organized. She sang to Orin every night. It had started as soothing. He was too young to be alone in the dark without sound, and her voice was what she had. But it became something else over the weeks, something she needed as much as he did, a way of marking that she was still here, that the day had been survived, that tomorrow was coming and they would face it. She taught him things, more than a 13-month-old could fully absorb, but she taught him anyway the names of plants, the difference between safe and dangerous berries, the way snow sounds when it's load-bearing versus when it's about to give. She talked to him constantly, the running narration of a woman who had spent 3 years in silence among people who weren't listening and now had someone who was, even if he was too small to fully understand. He listened with his whole body, the way small things do. She loved him in a way that was not complicated by anything. He had not required her to earn it, or perform it, or prove that she deserved it. He had simply arrived in her arms and looked at her, and that had been the whole of it. The second month was harder because the winter deepened in a way the first month hadn't prepared her for. Not a normal northern winter. Something older. The kind of winter that the pack elders talked about in the past tense. The ones that happened once in a generation, that tested everything down to the root. The cold came in and stayed. Temperatures dropped past the range she'd planned for. Prey became scarce. The prey she'd mapped and rotated disappeared deeper into the forest, following their own survival instincts, leaving her wider and wider, ranging to find food. She extended her hunting radius, came home later, pushed further. She was running on less than she should have been, rationing her own intake to make sure Oren had enough. She didn't let herself examine this choice too closely. It was not, in her accounting, a choice at all. It was simply what you did when you were someone's only protection. She was burning. She could feel it, the specific depletion of a body that is spending more than it's taking in. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, the way a fire burns down when you stop feeding it. She had reserves. She had always been physically strong. She burned through them slowly, carefully, without panic, the way she did everything. And then, on a night when the temperature dropped further than it had all winter, Oren woke up coughing. Act 3, the song. She knew what she was hearing. She had her mother's knowledge of illness, not the formal training of a pack physician, but the deep, careful knowledge of someone who had watched a healer work for 16 years and paid attention to every detail. She knew what a fever sounded like in a cub's breathing. She knew the specific quality of the cough that meant the lungs were struggling. She knew that in this cold, with no pack physician, no proper shelter heat, no access to the medicinals she needed, she was in serious trouble. She spent 3 days fighting it with everything she had. Kept the fire burning, went out in the worst of the cold to collect wood when her stores ran low, came back with ice in her eyelashes and her fingers barely functional, stoked the fire higher, brewed what teas she could from the dried herbs in her winter stores, kept Oren against her body for warmth, her own heat wrapped around him, spending it freely because he needed it, and it was hers to give. She did not sleep. Sleep was luxury. Sleep was for when the crisis was over. The crisis did not become over. On the 4th day, Oren's fever spiked. His breathing became labored. He stopped eating a small cub, refusing food in winter, that specific alarm, the one that sits in a mother's chest like a stone. She went out once more, desperate, into a storm that had been building for 2 days and was now fully present, a blizzard, the real kind, the kind that whited out everything within 10 feet and made the world into a roaring, formless wall of cold. She found nothing. The storm had swallowed everything. She came back to the den, sat beside her fire, held Oren. He was lighter than he should have been. His eyes, when they opened, had the glassy quality of something that was very far away. He made a small sound and pressed closer to her, and she pulled him in and felt his heat, the wrong kind of heat, fever heat, the heat of a body fighting something it was losing to. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you. You're all right." She had been saying this for 4 days. She had been willing it to be true with everything in her. She had been running on the empty place past exhaustion, past reserve, past the last thing you find when you thought you had nothing left. She had nothing left. She understood this quietly, without drama. The fire was low. She didn't have the strength to go for more wood. The storm outside was impassable. The fever in her cub's small body had not broken in 4 days. Her own hands, when she looked at them, were shaking in a way that was not cold. She pressed her lips to Oren's forehead, felt the heat there, felt his small chest rise and fall slowly, too slowly. She thought about the 3 years in Grey Hollow, all the things she'd given, all the things she'd never been given back. She thought about her mother, who had died alone, and whether this was something that ran in her blood, this specific destiny of loving without being caught. She thought about all the things she had wanted, not great things, a pack that knew her name and meant it, someone who saw past the surface to the actual person underneath. A world where her cub could grow up with other young ones, running in the snow, learning to hunt, becoming what he was supposed to become. Small things. She hadn't asked for much. And then she stopped thinking, and she started to sing. Her mother's song. The oldest one, the one her mother had sung in the hardest moments. Not because it fixed anything, but because it held the shape of the thing you were feeling when nothing else could contain it. A melody that moved like water over stones, that didn't demand or perform, that simply said, "I am here. I feel this. It matters." She sang it softly at first, for Orin, into his fur, with her eyes closed. And then she sang it louder, not performing, not for anyone. For the storm, for the dark, for the 3 years of silence and the months of burning and the specific cruelty of doing everything right and still arriving here, on this floor, in this cold, with this cub against her chest and nothing left in her hands. She sang it for all of that. Her voice cracked on the second verse. She kept singing. Her tears came. She had been holding them for so long that when they came, they were quiet. Not the dramatic grief of someone breaking all at once, but the steady release of something that had been pressing at the walls for a very long time, and had finally, gently, been let through. She didn't stop singing. She sang the last verse into the storm, into the dark, into the nothing that surrounded her on every side. And the storm shifted. Act 4. What stepped through the blizzard? She felt it before she heard it. A change in the pressure of the air. The specific quality of the silence that falls when something large and deliberate stops moving, not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, of something holding itself still. The fire, low as it was, flickered. Not from wind. The den's wind baffles were intact. Something had changed the air from outside. She looked up. At the entrance of the den, the gap in the timber she'd left for air circulation, not large enough for anything to enter, the snow was moving differently, being disturbed from outside by something that was standing just beyond it, just outside the circle of her firelight, in the storm. She was not afraid. She had moved past fear somewhere on the 3rd day. What she felt instead was a strange, unnameable alertness, every part of her that had been burning down, suddenly present. Suddenly paying full attention. "Who's there?" she said. Not a question, quite. A statement she was making to the dark. The storm moved, and Alpha King Cadron Ashvale stepped through the entrance of the den. He had to duck to come through. He was that tall, the kind of height that was less a measurement than a presence. Broad across the shoulders, and snow-covered and real in the way that things are real when they step out of what should have been impossible. His pack mark, the amber wolf sigil of the Ashvale bloodline, glowed faintly through the snow-soaked fabric of his cloak, lit from within, the way faded bond marks lit in the proximity of a soul match. He was looking at her, only at her, not at the den, not at the fire, not at the cub in her arms, at her, with the full, undivided weight of his attention, the way no one had looked at her in a very long time. She stared at him. "You're real," she said. It was not the most composed thing she had ever said. She acknowledged this. "Yes," he said. His voice was low, quiet for a man his size. Careful, the way you are careful with something fragile, not because you think it's weak, but because you understand its value. "What are you doing in this storm?" she said. Her voice was wrecked from the singing, from the crying, from 4 days of whispering to a sick cub. "I was at the Northern Ridge Camp when the storm hit," he said. "Something." He stopped. He looked at his pack mark, where the amber glow was brighter now, steadier, then back at her. "Something pulled me south. I followed it." He had not moved from the entrance. He was giving her space. She registered this clearly, the deliberateness of it, the way he had stopped at the threshold and waited. "The cub," he said. His eyes moved to Orin for the first time. She saw his face change the same recognition that any pack animal showed in the presence of a sick young one, the instinctive gravity of it. "How long has the fever been this high?" 4 days, she said. He crossed the den in 4 steps and crouched beside her, not reaching, not yet, looking at Orin with the careful attention of someone who was reading a situation before acting in it. "I have a physician at the Ridge Camp," he said. "Supplies. Medicine. The storm. Doesn't matter," he said. Simple. Complete. The specific tone of a man for whom an obstacle between him and a necessary outcome is simply a feature of the route, not a reason to stop. He looked at her then, up close, the amber eyes finding her face in the low firelight, and she watched the thing happen that she would think about later, in the weeks and months and years of later that were coming the moment his expression changed. Not from cold to warm. It was already warm. But from warm to something else, something deeper. The specific shift of a face, when it recognizes something it didn't know it had been looking for. His packmark blazed. She felt the soul match bond like a wave, not gentle, not subtle, the full, overwhelming recognition of it, the thing pack law called the fated bond, and that she had never expected to feel, because the fated bond happened to people the world made room for, and the world had spent a long time making clear that she was not one of those people. She felt it. She felt him feel it. They looked at each other in the firelight with the snow still in his hair, and her voice still wrecked, and her cub in her arms, and the bond between them hummed at a frequency she felt in her sternum, in her hands, in the place just below her ribs, where she kept the things that mattered most. You, he said, barely sound, the exhale of a man whose entire internal landscape has just been rearranged. I don't, she started. You're my fated mate, he said. Not a declaration, a discovery. The voice of someone saying a true thing out loud for the first time and hearing how it sounds. He stopped. I have been traveling for 6 weeks. I didn't know why. Something in the bond was pulling north, and I followed it, and He looked at her. At Oren. At the exhausted, wrecked, utterly undefeated woman in front of him who had survived alone in the harshest winter in a decade with a cub in her arms, and a song that had somehow reached him through a blizzard. I found you, he said. Act 5. The first safe night. She didn't let herself fall apart. Even now, even with the bond blazing between them and the impossible person in front of her and 4 days of burning behind her, she held herself together. Because Oren needed her to, and that need was older and more practiced than any other reflex she had. The cub first, she said. Everything else after. He nodded immediately. Yes. He reached out then, slowly, so she could see every movement, giving her every chance to redirect it. His hand, large and snow-cold at the surface but pack-warm beneath, came to rest against Oren's forehead. She felt the pack healing flow from him. It was different from what she'd read about in old texts, less surgical than a physician's work, more elemental. Alpha energy in its oldest form, the warmth of a dominant bloodline moving through the bond channels like heat through stone. Oren stirred. Made a sound not the labored, frightened sounds of the past 4 days. Something quieter. Something that moved toward peace, rather than away from it. The fever didn't break instantly. It wasn't magic. But something in his breathing changed, eased. The specific easing of a body that has found an ally, that has stopped fighting alone. She closed her eyes for a moment. Just one moment. He needs the physician, Kadrin said quietly. But he'll hold now until we can reach the camp. He's stronger than he looks. I know, she said. He always has been. He looked at her when she said that. Reading something in it she didn't know what she looked like to him, in that moment, and she was too tired to manage the impression. But whatever he was reading, his expression did not harden. How long have you been alone? He said. 3 years in Grey Hollow. Then, she calculated, 7 weeks since the boundary. 7 weeks, he said, very quietly. It's fine, she said. Old reflex. Take up less space. Need less. No, he said. It isn't. He said it the way she'd heard he was wrong, said once in a story simply, factually, with no argument around it. Just, it isn't, and we're not going to agree that it was. She looked at him. He was crouched beside her in a den built by her own hands, in a storm that should have kept any sane person at camp, with snow melting in his dark hair, and the packmark of the most powerful bloodline in 7 territories glowing quietly between them. He was not looking at her the way the court would have looked at her, not calculating her value, not assessing her lineage, not deciding what category to file her in and what that category was worth. He was looking at her the way she had always wanted to be looked at, and had stopped believing she would be. Tell me your name, he said. Your real name, all of it. Ren, she said. Just Ren. My mother didn't. Her voice caught slightly. She didn't have a pack name to give me. Ren, he said. Just her name. Said like it was enough. like it was more than enough. Something broke open in her chest, then the last held thing. The thing she'd been gripping since the boundary, since Grey Hollow, since 16 years old when her mother died, and left her to manage entirely on her own. The thing that had sustained her and imprisoned her simultaneously, the tight internal grip that had kept her functional and kept her from feeling the full weight of what had been done to her. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She'd done that during the song, spent it then. But she felt the break, the release of it, the specific exhale of someone putting down something they've been carrying for so long they forgot what it felt like not to carry it. He saw it happen. He didn't comment on it, didn't try to fix it or soothe it or reduce it. He simply remained present, steady, warm, real, the way you remain present with someone when you understand that presence is the thing they need and anything else is beside the point. "We need to move when the storm gives a gap," he said, after a moment. "There'll be one before dawn. There always is." "I know," she said. "I've been reading this storm for 2 days." "What does it tell you?" "An hour of reduced wind around the 3rd hour past midnight," she said. "Maybe 90 minutes. He looked at her. The assessment in his eyes was not the Grey Hollow kind, not looking for deficiency, not confirming a prior judgment. It was simple, clean recognition. "Enough," he said. "I know the ridge path. You know the storm. Between us we can do this." Between us. She had not been part of a between us in a very long time. "My stores," she said. "I need to take what I can carry. And Oren." "I'll carry him," he said. She looked at him. "You've been carrying him for 7 weeks," he said. "Let me carry him." She opened her mouth, closed it. She was going to argue. She could feel the argument forming, the old independence rising, the distrust of anyone who offered help, because help in her experience had terms attached, had conditions, had a point at which it was withdrawn, to demonstrate that it had never been certain to begin with. She looked at his face. At the faded bond mark glowing steady and warm between them, the mark that didn't lie, that couldn't be faked, that was older than any political arrangement or social calculation. At the man who had followed a pull through a blizzard for 6 weeks and had crouched in a small den and put his hands on a sick cub and said he'll hold now with the quiet certainty of someone who intended to make that true. "All right," she said. The word was very small, but she meant it completely. He reached out then carefully, asking with his movement rather than his words, and she placed Oren in his arms. Watched him take her cub with the same deliberate care he'd brought to everything since he'd stepped through the entrance. Watched Oren settle against the warmth of an alpha's chest and exhale a breath that sounded, for the first time in 4 days, like peace. "He's going to be all right," Kadrin said. "I know," she said. "You already told me." "I'm telling you again," he said, "because I think you've been the only one telling yourself things for a long time, and that's a hard habit to replace." She stared at him. He was not wrong. She looked away, at the fire, at the low familiar walls of the den she'd built herself, at the life she had constructed out of nothing and maintained through sheer refusal to stop. She thought about all of it, the 3 years, the 7 weeks, the singing into the storm. "What happens now?" she said, quiet, honest. She was too tired for anything but honest. "Now," he said, "we get Oren to the physician. We get you warm and fed, actually fed. Not whatever rationing you've been doing. I can see it in you, don't argue." She closed her mouth. "And then," he said, his voice changing to something that was softer and more careful and more real than anything she'd heard from another person in longer than she could precisely remember, "we talk. About the bond. About what it means. About what you want." "What I want," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "I'm aware that's not a question you've been asked much. I'm asking it. The fire crackled. Outside, the blizzard pressed against the walls of the den she'd built with her own hands, in a winter that had tried to take everything from her and had failed. She thought about what she wanted. "Safety," she said. "For him. A place where he can grow up and be what he's supposed to be." "Yes," he said. "People who actually see me," she said. "Not what they've decided I am. What I actually am." "Yes," he said again. And she stopped. "Say it," he said. She looked at him, the Alpha King in her den, with her cub in his arms and the fated bond between them, who had followed a pull through 6 weeks of winter because something in his blood had recognized something in hers and had not been willing to stop until it found her. Someone who stays, she said. That's all. Someone who actually stays. He held her gaze. No performance in it. No calculation. Ren, he said. I walked into a blizzard to find you. A pause. I'm not going anywhere. The storm gave its gap at the 3rd hour, exactly as she'd predicted. 90 minutes of reduced wind enough. He went first with Oren, and she followed with what she could carry, and he set the pace to hers without being asked, slowing when she needed, stopping when she signaled, moving through the dark mountain path with the bond warmth flowing between them like a guideline through the dark. The ridge camp was exactly as he'd described. Warm. Staffed. A physician who asked no questions about how an Omega with a sick cub and frostbite in 3 fingers had arrived in the middle of a blizzard with the Alpha King. Who asked no questions because the Alpha King's pack mark was blazing like a signal fire. Because everyone in the camp could see what this was. Because when the fated bond finds itself, there is no question to ask. There is only what comes next. Oren was in the physician's care within minutes. His fever broke before dawn. Ren sat beside his cot in the warm tent, with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of something hot in her hands, actually hot, genuinely warming her from the inside, and watched her cub breathe easily for the first time in 4 days. She heard Kadrin come in and stop behind her. She did not look up, but she felt him the bond, the warmth, the specific gravity of a presence she was already, against every instinct of self-protection she had, beginning to orient toward. Sleep, he said, quiet. I'll stay with him. You don't have to. Ren. She stopped. Sleep, he said again. I'll be here when you wake up. She was quiet for a long moment. You're going to have to be patient, she said. I'm not. She paused. I don't trust easily. I don't know how to be taken care of. I'm going to do things wrong while I'm learning, and I'm going to push back when you probably don't deserve it. I know, he said. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. That's all. 1 day at a time. She finally turned and looked at him over her shoulder. He was standing at the entrance of the tent with his arms at his sides, no performance, no alpha-bearing, no display of the power and rank that would follow them everywhere once they left this mountain. Just a man, holding still, waiting. 1 day at a time, she said. Starting with tonight, he said. Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. And what does come next? She said. He met her eyes, the amber of his pack mark warm in the tent's light. The bond between them settled and certain, older than either of them, patient in the way that things are patient when they know they've finally found where they belong. Next, he said, I take you and Oren home, and I dare any alpha in 7 territories to tell me otherwise. She turned back to Oren, listened to him breathe, thought about home, a word that had been hypothetical for so long she'd stopped reaching for it. Then tomorrow, she said softly. Let's talk about tomorrow. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 7 weeks, maybe longer, maybe years, she slept without keeping one part of herself awake to manage the dark. Because someone else was watching. Because for the first time in a very long time, she did not have to be the only one. She sang into the storm, and the storm sent her an answer she hadn't dared ask for. An abandoned Omega with frostbite in her hands and a dying cub in her arms. A king who walked through a blizzard because something in his blood would not let him stop. That is how fated bonds work. Not in ballrooms, not in ceremonies. In the dark places. In the cold. In the moments when someone is down to their last song, and the universe finally sends someone who can hear it.